A few months ago, I sat in two back-to-back meetings with two different mining developers, and both were pitching to the same fund. Not unusual. The industry is short on investors, but both had technically promising projects. The first team spent 90% of the time talking about the geology and the upside of the project, from maps and grades, drill results, and the new feasibility study that they had just published. When asked about community engagement, permitting risks, and sustainability strategy, they offered only general assurances, saying, "We'll handle it when we get there." Now, the second team took a different approach. They started by acknowledging the challenges, the permitting complexity, the community concerns in their region, the importance of environmental safeguards. Let's be honest, things that happen in every project in the mining world. But they didn't just stop at acknowledging that. They laid out their roadmap, recognizing that not every answer had been solved as yet. They set out that they'd done an independent risk review that they'd already commissioned. They have said how they're going to incorporate those findings back into the next feasibility study, and how they'd built engagement into their timelines. They also said that what external assurances that they were still pursuing in order to raise the confidence and transparency with communication with their investors, future investors. They did talk about the upside too. They talked about the exploration upside and et cetera, but they framed it all as part of a responsible path to delivery. Now, I'll let you guess which of these two companies move forward to due diligence and then achieve better terms on the back of that. But the story highlights what today's conversation is all about. Embedding responsibility into strategy is not just about doing the right thing. It's about proving that you're ready to deliver, and in doing so, unlocking capital and the opportunity in being a responsible miner. So I'm Jamie Strauss, I'm the founder and CEO of Digbee, and welcome back to all those who've been following us in the last 3 weeks on this webinar journey. And I'd also like to extend welcome to all those new to this webinar and how we're going to talk about embedding responsibility into the corporate strategy. Now, particularly for those new today, I'm just going to go back and do a little bit of context on where we were in the last couple of weeks, but also for those who have been around for a while, don't zone out. We've got some new data coming in, which I just want to talk about, which really highlights the opportunity from a financing point of view. So the mining industry has perhaps never been on such greater spotlight as we are today, with geopolitical trends, the energy transition, and other global trends. But with that, it has brought ever greater scrutiny than we've seen before. Investors, regulators, customers, and communities now demand proof of the responsibility, not just the promises or the single slides with a green tinge that we've had in the past. The cost of capital and the project viability itself depend very much on the credibility, not only of the management team, influenced through the sustainability strategy, but also in terms of the credibility with which that team has in developing and delivering a project on time and on budget. Now, I'm the first to say that I think small producers and developers face the highest hurdles. They don't have the balance sheets which the majors have, but they do have agility to their advantage. They have the ability to transform from being part of a cohort or the industry with which we've known about it for the last 20 or 30 years to standing out and being different. And there are many examples of that which we can point to. And I think what I'd like to just say on this is, if you're not embedding responsibility into your strategy, you are missing an opportunity. But it's not just missing that opportunity, which is important, but you're increasing your risk exposure by not doing so. Now, I said I was going to come to some new numbers, and I just want to highlight from PitchBook a report that they brought out last week with regards to potential new capital to come to the industry and the gap that we're missing as a sector. So the infrastructure world has assets under management of $1.9 trillion. That's forecasted to grow to $2.4 trillion over the next few years. Disappointingly, metals and mining, as part of the natural resources segment, is just 7.7% of that. Even more disappointingly is that's dominated by the oil and gas industry. And if you strip out the other areas such as timber and parts of the other sector, the mining industry is almost too small to measure. In fact, in 2017, the record year for capital raising in the private sector for mining industry was just $16.5 billion. On average, it's less than 10 billion. And let's just put that into context of where fundraising within the wider infrastructure spend is going at the moment. So the energy transition fundraise last year, which, let's be honest, very much includes metals and mining industry. It's not possible to have an energy transition without metals and mining, raised over $140 billion in 2024. Digital infrastructure, data centers, power transmission lines, again, absolutely requiring the mining industry, raised over 100 billion. The total dry powder available within the infrastructure funding world is just shy of $400 billion. Europe accounts for the clear majority of that. And so I think it's unreasonable to argue that the mining industry is missing out, when in actual fact, we're just not aligning with the new capital where it's going. We're seeing new groups such as Oryx and Infravia, the French Critical Mineral Fund. We're seeing the German fund coming in, as well as the Brazilian fund, Breakthrough Energy, which just invested again into cobalt. So there's ever-increasing signal and signs of new capital coming to us. Not only is it new capital coming, but there's also a pool of capital available and ready. We're just not aligned to it. So what does embedding responsibility really mean? And the first thing I should add is it's not a report. It's not about getting a report and just having it saying box ticked. It's a mindset. How can we be better prepared to integrate this through our company so that effectively we can be a lower risk company? I mentioned only last week the interview which I listened to of the CEO of Nucor, and how he is able to define and describe and justify how they have got a premium rating, how they've come from almost a zero in the steel world in the US to being highly regarded and valued. Making social, environmental and governance risk management part of every decision which comes from board and management is so critical to mitigating risk within the organization and the development of an asset. Aligning purpose, and I think there's a lot of purpose out there, but aligning purpose with action and demonstrating that from the boardroom down through management and with employees and contractors is so critical to how we change the culture of the company so that we can define risk and effectively define better value. So that really kind of brings me back to, I guess, my big bugbear, which I really just want to kind of just finish on in regards to this slide, is we've got to move away from this assumption that sustainability is just compliance. We've got to move from a compliance-driven process to a value-driven, responsible process, which creates the value throughout the organization with investors and with stakeholders. And the stakes cannot be higher. Let's go back to the data I brought up last week. 83% of mining projects go over budget, and they go over budget by an average of 40%. What does that mean? The equity shareholder has just been either wiped out or heavily diluted. Those numbers are worse when you go over $1 billion worth of CapEx. The key here is, how can we be in the 17%? What do we need to do to ensure that we've got the confidence and trust of our investors that we can be part of that 17%? This is not rocket science. We've got a lot against us, but we can bring things forward dramatically. We can transform this industry. Permitting times have doubled to nearly 20 years, yet there are many capabilities or parallel permitting that can now reduce that and reverse it. We've reached a tipping point where governments recognise the importance of supporting mining to some degree and perhaps reversing some of the trends over the last 20 or 30 years. But at the same time, we've got to make sure that we listen, we recognise to communities. They stop or delay projects more often than mining companies would like to hear. So what is it if you're a financier and you're an investor being pitched to? Do you want to hear all the good news only as the whole thing and it looks wonderful as to what a company has done up to that? Or do they want to have the confidence in this management's ability to deliver responsibly and not be held up by delays and other matters? This is very much the foundation, in my opinion, of the social license to operate. Not just that, but also the cost of capital and increasingly the access to capital. So let's just dig in as to who gains and how do they gain by just going through some of the key persona within a company as to where sustainability and the interaction of sustainability is most deeply felt. First of all, the CEO. So the CEO sets the tone at the top. It's responsibility. If that's set as the core to growth, then it effectively filters the whole way through. The CEO can gain credibility, not just for the company, but also to himself or herself, through transparent, accountable communication with investors, communities, and regulators. And I think above all, from an operational standpoint, rather than just looking at how do we avoid the negative, let's look at the positives. All parts of the supply chain are now involved with sustainability or having a responsible supply chain. So let's listen to them and see how we can work with them for our benefit. Having an independent assessment and being able to demonstrate where you are enhances the ability to negotiate with off-takers, with joint ventures, getting better financing terms, and obviously therefore getting better access to capital. And it very much creates a legacy of sustainable development, which will go on beyond that CEO to their successor. And as the company, whether it's in M&A or ultimately through into production and beyond. Now, let's talk about the CFO. The weight of responsibility on the CFO is huge at the time of development. They've got to go out and raise capital at frankly, anything other than the current cost of capital, which the mining industry is having to suffer. What does that require? It requires a huge amount of preparation, not just from them in terms of communication, but in terms of being able to deliver a lower risk proposition relative to the peers, to an investor or bank or off-taker or otherwise. So the goal here has got to be, how can I get a lower cost of capital through better preparation, through risk mitigation strategies that I can communicate effectively and therefore win. The CFO also is an important element of communication to the board, and the forecasting with which any CFO has very much comes down and incorporates sustainability as part of it. With clearer risk-adjusted forecasts through that capability, that CFO will have a far stronger ability to communicate forecasts more credibly with the board. So now to the head of sustainability. I'm really excited to talk about this. I think this is a real opportunity for mining companies. How do we effectively move the head of sustainability from a report writer of sustainability reports, which I talked about last week, to a strategic enabler? Somebody who becomes best friends with the CFO and the CEO as they go to improve the credibility and the transformation of the company and gain access to capital, etc. This person becomes the bridge between the operations, the community, and the board to better align responsibility throughout the company. And I think it's a really important job function to bring into the design and development of mines of the future. How can this person gain influence by embedding material sustainability issues, some of which may have significant impact in the OPEX of the future, lower as well as to some extent there are some areas where there's got to be investment and therefore risk. But how can we create greater influence by embedding material sustainability issues into the project planning and the execution of the project? And I think ultimately, again, this comes back down to shifting the narrative from just compliance, pen pushing a role, to a competitive advantage, supporting the C-suite in terms of engagement with different stakeholders within finance, etc. Now, with regards to the Sustainability Committee and the board as a whole, look, it's so difficult to incorporate sustainability across all the different topics and have that comfort to know you're on top of all of your risks. So having an independent visibility on critical risks is really important. It doesn't only give you the granularity, but it gives you the ability to be able to prioritize, strengthen governance and accountability. It protects directors' reputations and aligns the company with global investor expectations, which have been changing so rapidly over the last few years. And it provides confidence that this company is future-proofing its asset as a responsible producer of the future. So how do we embed responsibility into a company's strategy? So first of all, let's just focus on 3 key words: identify, prepare, and communicate. First of all, conduct an independent assessment. Understand your material risks across the spectrum of sustainability and understand where the greatest challenges and opportunities lie so that you can better prepare by prioritizing these risks. Use this to mitigate risks within permitting, your future studies, stakeholder engagement, and to be able to communicate more effectively, particularly through the CFO function, when you're going in to engage with investors. Build responsibility into the project design early on, rather than as an afterthought, which always ends up with higher cost and extended delays. And then communicate. Be proud, be bold of your commitment to responsible mining. This is a strategic advantage. To be able to communicate that you are lower risk than your peers equals better value. Tell the story proactively to investors. Put it on the front page or maybe the second or third page of your presentation. Proudly highlight the areas of risk that you know are likely to come generically by developing a project and what you're doing to mitigate those risks to give the confidence back to those investors and communities. Demonstrate with evidence, not slogans, with evidence that risks are identified and being mitigated, you're on top of it and you have a clear timeline with which you're going to act. And then the second part of the communication side is build feedback loops. Do independent assessments on an annual basis to give board oversight, external validation, but also internal management guidance. Make responsibility part of how you measure success, whether or not it's KPIs, internally at management level, or throughout the business, or even externally with your different stakeholders. And if we get all of this in place and we can begin to embed this in, we begin to move the mining industry from the past, which has failed and broken, and the stats I've highlighted kind of all state that. But if we can begin to incorporate this and we get a cohort of lower risk companies that are moving forward, that are proactively talking about their sustainability agendas and how this is embedded, we can attract more patient, lower cost capital. We can increase confidence from off-takers and partners as we engage and negotiate with them. We secure faster, smoother permitting and approvals as the permitting processes begin to change more towards the mining industry's requirements. We reduce operational and reputational risk, so important, not just for humans and their reputational risk, but also in terms of making sure that the operational risks don't delay and cause us to go over budget. And that obviously leads to under-promising and over-delivering as well. So all of this comes together so that we can position the company for future growth or M&A, whether it's receiving or effectively external. Embedding responsibility isn't about just pleasing NGOs. It's about winning in today's mining world, which is changing at an ever-increasing speed, but where there is a greater opportunity than we've ever seen in the course of the last 20 or 30 years. So to summarize, I embolden you CEOs to go out and champion sustainability and responsibility so that you can benefit internally, credibly, but also externally with regards to a greater valuation. I empower you CFOs to embed risk into your strategy so that you can become better prepared when you go for your due diligence and come back with a better result in terms of cost and access to capital, greater flexibility across the capital space. For new heads of sustainability, I give you the strength to have the conviction to mitigate risk, help your CEOs and CFOs using independent assessments to guide you, to support your role, but also to come up with new ways of strengthening your company and to make it more resilient. And for all those boards of directors and committees, I give you the capability of an independent assessment to strengthen your role, to make sure that you've got third-party evidence to support your reputational risk, but also the long-term strategy of that company. Companies that embed responsibility into their strategy today will be the leaders of tomorrow's mining industry. Good luck, and thank you very much. Let's open it to questions.
Well, good evening from London, and thank you all for listening in on that. I'm fascinated with the poll. We did this conference or this webinar this morning, and there's an overwhelming majority of people who say that they're concerned by the erosion of investor or lender confidence. And I asked myself, oh my word, it's already terrible, and we're thinking that that's going to get worse. I have a different approach. I think there are huge opportunities now with the tools that we've got and independent assessments and new ways of communicating to really engage with investors and to turn this around. Anyway, let's not dwell on that. Maybe a couple of you others, a few other people can just press that button to maybe confirm or deny whether or not those results continue to be the case if you've not already answered that. So let me go to a couple of questions which have come through. I'm just going to go from the top here. Is there not a risk that total candor about all the risks and solutions with investors may leave the candid company exposed as underprepared relative to its less candid competitors? I don't think so. And I don't say that because one needs to put on the table all of the risks that one is dealing with. I think what I'm trying to say here is be open and transparent with regards to your strategy. Be open, as I said, I think it was last week, in terms of building credibility, whereby not all answers are there and they need engagement with different communities and potentially other stakeholders. And I think transparency and honesty, given the facts of 83% of all projects going over budget, and therefore companies going into that process ahead of that time, better prepared and having consulted on these areas and then come up with solutions to effectively address those, ultimately, I think ultimately brings confidence and trust back into the fold, which we've perhaps been missing for the last couple of decades. So hopefully that answers it. I really feel as though, and from the experience that I'm seeing at the moment, that the companies don't actually risk being unprepared by doing this. Quite the opposite. I think they're the ones earning trust and confidence. The second one is, can you show examples of how embedded responsibility has directly improved financing terms or permitting outcomes? Look, I think the opportunities here are emerging, or the results are emerging. The answer is yes. I think, I mean, just recently, Bunker Hill, on its refinancing to complete the development of its project, having bought spot lending in, tech in, and others, have clearly shown an environmentally and socially de-risked project that has captured the imagination of different investors. And even speaking with some of those investors, that's been confirmed. But I think wider afield, I think we should look at this rather than the specifics. Is, you know, look at the value destruction across the different areas of. We're going to group the word sustainability. If you take what is the cost to a company if you have not fully designed properly a tailings dam and it ultimately has problems either in its development or ultimately in its operation? The cost of that reputationally, in terms of God forbid, a tragic accident like we saw in Brazil, the cost which BHP in their case had to suffer as a result of that, as well as Vale and Samarco. What is the cost in health and safety if we don't have all the processes and procedures in place which can bring down the historical health and safety records to where we are now, which is really significantly improved on the past. And the cost of that in terms of worker confidence, the efficiency, the productivity, the stoppage as a result of regulations when tragedies happen. And this goes on and on and on. So if you begin to term all of these potential risks into where investors, when they're coming in and looking at a project as to where that the risk matrix may be, and you can feel that this company, this management team is on top of those, then obviously that one has a far level greater of confidence to know that the resilience of a company will benefit. How early in a project's life cycle do you recommend starting an independent risk assessment? And what's the impact if a company waits until the feasibility stage? But there isn't a right or wrong answer. The reality is we're in a fairly new area of the mining industry. And I mean, call it as it is, but 83% of projects going over budget is not a great way to start, but that is the starting point. So how can we mitigate risk at the most impactful time? Well, as early as possible. Now, it should be done on a right size basis. We should not be going down a full ICMM or IRMA or other audit process at an exploration level. That would be ludicrous. However, getting an independent assessment, being better informed of all of these different areas really helps the design and then ultimately the development of these projects so that they can be deemed to be responsible and a lower risk when they get into production. And I think just on this last one, in case anybody else wants to add any further, but what does external assurance actually involve and how does it differ from an internal ESG reporting or compliance work that they already do? I think this might take longer than the minute or so that I have, but I think the bottom line is an independent assurance process informs management and boards of their areas of risk rather than the tick boxer process. And if we've got the ability to understand the specific areas of risk that can address things on the ground and in the boardroom, that very much defines the way the company's delivering its culture and therefore can have a roadmap of de-risking going forward. What does it involve? It involves actually, it's relatively light touch. Go through, in the case of a development stage company using Digbee, it's about 80 questions, providing evidence and narrative to support that. We've got an AI tool that helps that, subject to having enough information coming in from some documents, and should only take a company 2 or 3 days to effectively get that done with that help and support. We then have a 3-week assessment process before we give a draft report back. So that gives you a kind of rough context of the time and effort that goes into this. It's not as rigorous as a full audit, nor is it as boxed in as a compliance process where you're just trying to meet a global standard, with which Digbee is aligned to, but is much more practical and on the ground for the project and the company. So I think at that I'm going to leave it. It's 6:30 here in London. And if anybody's got any further questions, by all means, reach out to me on LinkedIn or on email if you've got my address. And next week we're going to be talking about life after verification, really the summary of all of this and how companies can go forward and begin to plan and go forward, progress from there and benefit. I really appreciate everybody dialing in tonight. I wish you either a good evening or good morning, wherever you happen to be. And thank you very much indeed. All the best. Bye-bye.